Hi everybody, it's Alexa here from Once Upon a Chapter, and I'm here today to do something a little bit different. I am making a goals list for 2017 for my reading year. In the past, I have done my own goals, so that's not what's new for me, but in the past, I would just post them on the blog and I wouldn't really talk about them because I didn't pick specific books for the categories that I had. And the categories that I used to do included things like read 15 books that you own on your shelf, or read 10 new releases of that year, or finish 2 series this year. So it basically meant that I was entirely open to just reading whatever I wanted, and then I would just read anything I wanted and then fit them into those categories on the blog. So one day I might pick up a book that was the last book in a series, and so that counted for finishing a series. And maybe the next day I picked up a new release of that year and I read that, and then that counted for that. And I'd like to kind of see my reading year in total that way. And I thought it really helped to understand how many of my own books I was reading, how many books I was borrowing from people and reading, what did I borrow from the library and read, and I just thought it kind of helped me categorize a reading year without being very specific. This year, however, I think I want to try something different, and I want to give myself some categories to try and complete books into a category that is preset with preset book titles on it. That way I can kind of like, not necessarily force myself to read certain books this year, but definitely try and get certain books off of my TBR list this year. So I'm going to give you some examples of some of the categories I'm picking this year and some of the book titles that I am putting on those categories. I'm not by any means showing you all of the categories or all of the books in those categories because that would make an extremely long video and I'm not really into that. So I'm just going to show you little snippets, and then if you're interested in knowing the rest of this, if you're watching on BookTube, you can go over to Once Upon a Chapter and see my entire list in actual blog format post on there with this video attached to it. And I want to kind of challenge myself to get around to a lot of those books that have been sitting on my shelves or series or anything like that that I've just had unfinished for a long time. So let's get into some of the categories and some of the examples of books on those categories so you can know a little bit about what I'm talking about and what I'm planning on doing with my reading year. The first category is series that I want to finish in 2017. Like I said, in the past, I just left this open to interpretation. I could start, finish any series, and it was still a good way to get series finished, but it didn't necessarily push me to finish a series that I had started, 5 or 6 years ago. So I'm really hoping that I can narrow it down to series that are a little bit older that I want to get done. So some examples of this would be, I do have the 6th and final book in the Vampire Academy series, Last Sacrifice. I started Vampire Academy a few years ago already, and I really wanted to finish this series off this year in 2016. Unfortunately, it just didn't happen. This last book is kind of long, and the 4th book was my favorite, and I was kind of struggling through book 5 a little bit. So I think that just kind of put me off of finally finishing this. Plus, I don't think I was ready for the end of their story yet, so I think I've just been putting this off a little bit. But I do want to dive in. I do want to finish this. This is a series that I've owned for many years and that I've been reading now for a few years. And I just think it's time to wrap it up and move on, especially because I own all of the books in the Bloodline series. So it is kind of time to end one and maybe even start the next series this year. Next up on my list is the 3rd and final book in the Hex Hall series, and that is Spellbound. This book was released in 2012, and I bought it when it was released because I was reading the series when it was, when it had first been coming out. And, I really was enjoying the Hex Hall series. It was like a cute, kind of fun way to talk about witches and wizards and their schooling and everything, and I liked the characters. It wasn't mind-blowing by any means, but it was just something good to read that I enjoyed. So I don't know why I put off finishing this final book in the series for so long, but it's definitely something that I want to get to because it's just one book and then I'll be done with the series that I started reading 5 years ago now. And then one more series that I'd like to highlight. I think I read the first 2 books in this series, not this year in 2016, but probably in 2015 I think I started it. This is another one of those series where I'm not completely all out madly in love with it, which I think is why I haven't been super just crazed to finish it. But I do want to know what happens because I feel like the 2nd book left off not on a cliffhanger point, but on a point where it was just kind of suspenseful and you wanted to know what happened next. So I'd really love to read The Iron Queen and then read The Iron Knight, and then I can call this series done, and that I enjoyed it and read it all, and that I can move on. Because I think there is a spin-off. There's a spin-off series about her brother, I think, to this, and I'm not sure if I'll be interested enough to read that, but I do own other books by the author as well that I might want to move on to, you know. Another big category of mine is going to be a category where it's constantly, I think, in flux during the course of the year. This category is not really limited for me. It's just a category that I'm calling most excited to read in 2017. This is going to include some 2017 releases, and this is going to also include some things that in the past year or two, I feel like I just didn't get to. You know, the new releases in 2015 that everybody was excited about, or the new releases in 2016 people were excited about that I didn't read. Some examples so far, I really want to read Three Dark Crowns. I met the author and everything this year, and I do have an art copy of this, and I got it from ALA, and I still haven't read it. I think I was worried that it wasn't going to be as good as I was hoping, but then when I was watching a lot of videos near the end of the year here about top books in 2016, a lot of people were talking about this, so now I'm really intrigued, and I want to read it. Another book that I'm so upset with myself that I did not get to is Empire of Storms. I really love this series. I kind of binge read this series. I think this year and part of the previous year. It was a series where the first 3 books and almost Queen of Shadows was almost out before I even started reading the series. I think I read the first 3 books like months before Queen of Shadows released, and then I read like immediately when Queen of Shadows came out. I read it right away. And then when Empire of Storms came out, you know, I went to the store and I had to have a copy, and I had to, you know, go everywhere to get a copy. And then I haven't read it yet. And that's just really sad to me. So I definitely want to get to this one in 2017. One more book that I was kind of upset that I didn't get to yet, and I kind of think I put it off because I thought I had to finish her previous series before I could read this one. And from what people say, I don't think you have to do that. I think the series can stand on its own. I think there might be a few Easter eggs that you miss out on, maybe, perhaps, if you don't know the previous novels that well. But I'm willing to take that bargain because people just seem to really like this. I do, you know, hint, hint, I do have her other series on my list of series to finish in 2017 because I have the second and the third book to finish. I've only read the first book of her previous series. So there's a little kind of like, you know, surprise for you guys, I guess, that I revealed another book that's on my series list to complete before I actually post the list on the blog. And one more category that I decided to do that I'm going to mention. Like I said, the categories are still a little bit in flux and I might add more, but this category is something that I really want to focus on this year. I decided to pick 15 books off of my shelf that have been on my shelf for way too long. These are books that have been on my Goodreads list since 2010 to 2011, which means that in 2017 they'll have been on my list for 6 to 7 years without me reading them. So they've definitely been sitting on my shelf for at least 6 or 7 or more years because I was obviously a reader before I joined Goodreads and put everything onto Goodreads in 2010. So some of these books could have been on my shelf for a decade, and I just haven't gotten to them. One of those would be the first in the Sweet series. This is Sweet Surrender. The lighting is kind of making it so you can't see this one. But I read a Maya Banks book a couple years ago, and then I just got obsessed with wanting to read all of her books. And so this one has been on my shelf for quite a long time. I'm not quite sure all the way back in 2011, but it's just one that has piqued my interest for a long time, and I own a lot of the books in the series, and I just would really be interested in reading the whole thing. A book that I know has been on my shelf for at least the 7 years, if not more, is Graceling. I do now, because of Book Outlet sales, I do own all 3 books in the series, so if I really enjoy this one, I can just keep going with it and just say that I finally read it. I know a lot of people, when this was releasing many, many years ago, they really loved this series, and as the other books were releasing, they still really loved this series, so I don't know what my problem is with this one, that I've put it off for so long, but this is definitely one of the 15 that I really want to get to this year. And then the last example that I have is Starcrossed. This is the first book in her older series. She now has a newer series where I think almost all 3 books are out in the newer series that she wrote as well, which I think starts with Trial by Fire. But I've owned this book for an exceptionally long time. I'm kind of scared to find out what the publication date of this one is. The publication date of this one is 2011 was when this was released. So yeah, this has been on my shelf for probably a good 6 years now, and it's time to either read it or ditch it. So that's kind of my goal in 2017, is to decide what books I'm reading, what books need to go, what books have been there for too long. I kind of did an unhaul of books. I didn't really show it because I didn't want to talk about it. Not because I'm afraid of what people think of me for getting rid of books, but you know, reading tastes change as you grow up, and sometimes the books that you bought maybe when you were 16 years old, or the books that you even bought when you were 20 years old, or whatever the case may be, you may not be interested in those, you know, 5, 7, whatever years later. So I did do kind of like a cleaning out of my bookshelves to get rid of things that I just said, I'm never going to read this. And I think it really helped, but I definitely want to narrow that down now because I am really interested in reading Sweet Surrender. I'm really interested in Graceling. I'm really interested in all these books, and that's why I couldn't unhaul them without at least giving the stories a try. So those are 3 examples of categories that I have. I'm trying not to put too many categories because I do want to have like just a big, massive miscellaneous category where I just read things that necessarily weren't on the list, but things that I wanted to read. So I want to leave my reading somewhat open to interpretation, so I'm not locked into reading just a set, like 50 or 60 books this year. I want to have room to read what I want still, even though I have a couple lists that I want to get through. So I'm hoping that between a mix of some preset list books and just some randomized books that I want to read this year, that I will have a great reading year. I am shooting for a total of 50 books to read this year. I feel like that's a more comfortable number for me now. I used to read 100 to 150 books a year, and I just think that that eats up a lot of time, and I have other things to do with my life other than just sit around reading. I love reading, don't get me wrong. You know, I run a book blog, I do booktube videos, I do a lot of bookish community things, I go to bookish events all year long. So I definitely love books, I love reading. It's not something I'm going to be giving up, but it's not something that I want to feel like I'm forcing myself to read 100 books a year and sit there and like make myself do it. I have a very busy, crazy work schedule, and it's possible that that's going to get even worse in 2017 because I'm probably going to be working 2 different jobs in 2017. So, you know, I'm just going to take it as it comes. If I get close to 50, I'm going to call it a great reading year. I do want to shoot for at least 50 because that's about 1 book a week, and I think I can make that happen. So anyway, I hope you guys will check out the blog, onceuponachapter.com, in order to see what all I'm reading in these categories I've chosen for myself. If you have recommendations for things that you really think I should add to my must-read in 2017 list, please let me know, because like I said, that list is going to be the most in flux one throughout the course of the year as I add my, you know, favorite releases of 2017 that I want to read to it. But that's everything for now. I hope you guys are going to enjoy this new format of how I plan on doing my reading year. We'll see if it's going to work or not for me. And have a great reading year, everybody. Bye!